So this morning, continuing with our summer chat series that we've had, and it's been quite successful, and we're just so pleased that so many people have stepped up to say they would agree to being interviewed on a Sunday morning. This morning we have Rick Williamson, and as I already said, his wife Nancy was unable to come this morning. They have a cat that is on its way of passing out of this world, and she needed to stay there. So we'll say a prayer for that and for her, and knowing that, as I already shared, she has heard enough of his wit and wisdom already, so maybe she's proud of him too. This morning, we're going to ask Rick if he'll tell us a little bit about his early life.
Sure. Well, I guess my life started normal. My mother and father were high school sweethearts, married and started off. But that only lasted about 4 years, because when I was about 4, my father died of a cerebral aneurysm while we were on a trip to Mexico. And that kind of sent my life in a very unusual direction. This was 1957, I'm thinking. And so my mother, being married out of high school, she had no job skills, and how do you break in money? She took in laundry and cleaned houses, and she married, I think, the first man that came along that she thought would work out, and we all know how that works out. Mm-hmm. It was kind of traumatic and trauma and poverty, and it got hard. It was just, and I kept thinking, my mom was always, go to church, and we'd go to a Baptist church, and it wasn't really, I don't mean to diss the Baptists, but they were busy telling us how bad everybody else was. The Mormons weren't good, and the Catholics weren't good, and the Lutherans weren't good, and maybe the Presbyterians, but, and like, okay, somewhere there's positive in this world. Now, this was, by now, it's probably 63 or 64. The civil rights movement is moving, and it sounds terrible, but I lived in a very small town in California, Victorville, California, and they talk about the racial segregation here, nothing like California, because there was a section of town that I didn't even know existed. And that was the black section. It was called Evadale, and they had schools and stores and churches. And I met a couple of boys from that area. We were working in a restaurant. I'm thinking, where did these black kids come from? Because there were no black kids in my school. There were no black kids in my neighborhood. And about that time, a church bought an empty home in our neighborhood. Now, to say neighborhood is iffy, because there were no paved streets, and there were no curbs. So there would be a house, and then there would be unimproved land in another house. And they bought this home, this kind of catty corner from us. And it turns out it was the Living Waters Pentecostal Church, which was I would say predominantly black, but it was all black, because in those days you didn't have black churches, and you had black churches and white churches. And the thing that struck me with that church was the music. Excuse me. It was beautiful and lively. Excuse me. And when the trauma of my home was there, I would go sit outside the church. I'm sorry.
Don't apologize. No. Thank you. Thank you for sharing with us. We're fine.
But it was joyful. think that's where I started liking blues and gospel. And I just liked it. It was nice, and it gave me peace. As time went on, I found myself at odds with the community and with the police because I had no role models. And that's when I discovered that the universe, I had no word for it, spirit, universe, God, Allah, Yahweh, would put people in your life that would send you in the right direction. And it was probably, fast forward, I'm completing my associate's degree, which took me, 3.5 years, because you work and take a class, work and take a class. In my mind, I'm thinking I need a college degree. I don't know why, because nobody I knew had one, but it was just driven. I remember I'm getting my degree. I'm set up to get my degree that Friday or Saturday. I'm sitting in the Commons, and a professor who was, I guess important to me, he was small college. He was head of the psychology and the philosophy department. And I think the only professor of those particular topics, his name was Dr. Danielson. He comes through the Commons, and I'm sitting there kind of like realizing that, where do I go from here? I mean, there's no 4-year college near me, really. Well, there was one, it was about 40 miles away, but, And I'm thinking, how do I get there? How do I, move, get a job? And not getting any help from my mom. She's like, well, if you want to go to college, but then you could always go to work at the cement plant. I'm like, okay, not on the radar. So Dr. Daniels comes through, and he sees me sitting there pondering, and he goes, hey, you should be excited. You're going to get your associate's degree. Your life is opening up. And I go, yeah, but there are other things to that. And he says, meet me in my office in about an hour. And so I thought, well, that's cool. And so I'm waiting. I go over there. I probably got there within 10 minutes. But so he comes in, and he goes, tell me what's going on. I said, well, finishing my associate's degree, the closest 4-year college is in San Bernardino, and it's literally 40 miles away, which means you're not going to commute. You're not going to commute. You're going to just have to move, which means getting a job, finding apartments, which financially for me was really rough. And I told Dr. Danielson, I said, I'm looking at how I can get through college. And the best I can figure is by taking the courses as I can afford, I'm looking at 8 years to get it, the remainder 2 years of my degree. I'll never forget him. He looked at me and goes, 8 years. Whoa, that is a long, long time. Not helpful. And then he gets this look, he goes, hey, wait. How old will you be in 8 years if you don't finish college? And I'm looking at him going, yeah, we're looking at like 27. And he goes, no, that's 27 years. Wait, how old will you be in 8 years if you do finish college? 27, I'm thinking, idiot, it's 8 years. And he just looks at me and goes, that is fascinating. And he walks out, and I'm sitting there going, what the? I thought you were supposed to help, And then it dawns on me, 8 years will pass no matter what I do. So, and it did. It took me, I moved to several, moved to Ventura to manage a restaurant. I moved to San Diego to manage a restaurant. When I got to San Diego, I was excited because there were 4-year universities up. There was a wheelbarrow full of them. I mean, there was Point Loma Nazarene, there was SDSU, there was SDU, UCS, USD. I'm like, holy crap. And I ended up taking courses at most of them, because if I took more than like 3 courses, they wouldn't let me with working full time unless I was, and so I would take 2 courses at Point Loma Nazarene and 1 at USD. And I kept that up, and I finished up, and finally, I finished my degree. I was right at 27, got my bachelor's. Many of the students at Point Loma Nazarene thought I was a teacher. They go, what do you teach? I don't. I run a little restaurant. But that was when I realized that the Spirit, the Lord, puts people in your way to help you. Another one was a guy named Steve White. I was living in Ventura, taking a couple courses at community college there to work my way up. And I was nervous, because this was it was probably one of the swanky top little restaurants in the area. And I'm thinking, here I am, I have an associate's degree, I'm just, barely, and this restaurant catered to doctors and lawyers and, captains of industry. One guy that used to come in, he owned USA Gas and has 200 patents. And when this was a very powerful clientele, and they intimidated me. I mean, I felt nervous walking up going, how's everything? Because I thought, if they say anything's wrong, I'm just going to collapse. And I wasn't used to being around powerful people. I wasn't used to being around people. Steve White took me aside. He goes, you got to stop looking at these people like you're afraid. I said, well, I am. I mean, what do I do if, he goes, they're as much afraid of you as you are of them. And I said, that can't possibly be true. These are doctors and lawyers, and they have degrees and degrees upon degrees, and they have all the papers. These are pedigree, and I'm a mutt. And he goes, I want to show you something. And so he takes me on my day off to Los Angeles, to the Bonaventure Hotel, which is very classy, very swanky, glass elevators that go up and down, and stuff hanging from plants growing from the ceiling. And what are we doing here? He says, I want you to ride the elevator for a couple of hours. Excuse me? He goes, get in the elevator, just stand there. When someone gets in, just ask them what floor they're going to get on and hit it, and then put your back to the door and face them and say, what brings you to LA? Are you here on business? Are you here on pleasure? Do you have family? Just ask them questions, and then when they answer them. And the first thing I noticed is when I would turn around and face them, they would take a step back. And I went out and explained that to Mr. White. I said, well, then they listen, and he said, then they get comfortable. And he goes, they don't know you. And the people in that restaurant don't know you. Look at them, ask the question, take the answer, and respond. And he was responsible for giving me what I call my personal power. And so, like I said, there are people, and my whole life has been that way. I moved to Ventura because I realized if I stayed in Ventura, I'd end up in jail, and probably prison. It was not a good place. And so I guess the urging of the Spirit, and my probation officer, by the way, said, you need to leave here, because if you stay, you're going to go to prison, because the police are mad at you. They had arrested me for no cause, and I threatened to sue the county, and they said, no, you're going to sign this. It said you're being held on protective custody. And I said, protected from what? You. And the officer, his name was Smitty, said, you don't understand. If you don't sign this paper, you're not getting out of jail. I said, you can't do that. You can't hold me forever. He goes, oh, you'd be surprised. We will put you on a bus, and that bus will go to county. And there will be no paperwork, but you're on the bus, and they will give you a cell. And in a few weeks, they'll put you on another bus, and there'll be no paperwork. And we could probably do that for several years since you have no way of reaching anybody, because you'll never get a phone call. And I'm like, crap, this man is serious. And so I signed the paper, and I got out of jail, and my probation officer was waiting for me when I got out, and he said, come with me. He said, now, the district attorney has agreed to drop all this, obviously, and allowed you to plead not guilty to previous charges. And he said, my advice to you, don't stay here. Because he said, they will be after you. Go home, get in your car, and move. I said, where to? He said, it doesn't matter. Just move. Just get out. And so I drove all that night to Ventura, California, because that's as far west as I could go because there was an ocean in the way. I pulled into a parking lot. There's a Carol's restaurant, which is kind of like a Denny's, And the next morning I got up and went in to have breakfast, and there was another angel. A guy named Steve Lee. And we're talking, and he goes, so, what's up? I go, well, I'm just, headed up the coast looking for a place to live. He goes, where are you going? I don't really know. He said, what do you do? I said, well, remarkably enough, I'm a cook. He said, remarkably enough, I need one. I said, seriously? And he goes, yeah. He says, can you start tomorrow? And I thought, well, let me check my calendar. My sole possession is a Volkswagen van with a guitar and a stereo and 4 pairs of jeans. I think I'm good. And so that night I was excited. I rented a hotel room. When I got to that town, I had exactly $200. And I rented a Motel 6. I think it was like $29 and change. I went out to dinner, treated myself to a Big Mac and fries. Going high on the hog. And the next day I go to work, and I'm working, and I think, I need a place to live. I need a place to live, like not my van. So I'm driving around in this little road called Seaway Avenue. It's right on the ocean, as it would indicate, and there's some, shall I say, less than Class A apartments, but livable, and the sign said, for rent, see John at John's. John's was a restaurant bar, across the street. I went in there and I said, how much for the apartment? He said, it's $150. And I had like 162. I'm like, okay, I got it. And he goes, and there's a $50 deposit. I'm like, oh my. I said, I got the 150, but I don't have the deposit. He goes, I'm sorry, it's not negotiable. I said, hey, I'm working. I only got to town yesterday. I have a job. I'm working for Steve Lee up at Carol's. And he goes, you've been in town for less than 24 hours and have a job? And I go, that's true. Steve hired me, and I'm working 6 days a week up there for him. And he goes, just a second. He called Steve. He came back. He says, I'll take a chance. And I have a car. I have a job. I have a place to live. And I've only been here for 27 hours. And I thought, we're going to stay. And that's when I realized that sometimes, as Frank was saying, don't plan. Don't just, the voice is saying go.
So you had a theme going in your life, and although it hadn't occurred to anyone in your family at a young age because of all the drama and poverty, that you could see that there was a synchronicity.
Absolutely.
Where every time you had a need, someone was there to give you a word of advice, steer you the right way. And then after you finished college, you taught in high school. How many years?
I taught junior high.
You taught junior high
for 27 years.
27 years, and where was that?
I started out in San Diego. I did 5 years in San Diego, and I wanted, at that time I was a young father, I wanted a non-urban existence for my children, so I moved from San Diego to Paris, California, or Paris, Idaho. Paris had a population of 400, and the county it was capital of was 3,000. Very small, very rural, and I loved it. I just really did love it.
You were there how many years?
I was there for 21 years. 21.
My goodness. And you enjoyed, and you were teaching school when you
Yeah.
moved here.
Yep. That's how I got here. It's interesting. Nancy, you all know Nancy. She was, we met online, Match.com.
Oh,
Well, when you're in a rural area, and my first wife, let's just say things went south. And that way we don't blame anybody when things went south.
right.
And
Things went south.
it's like, where do you meet people to date in a town of 400? Especially if you're 43 years old and you have partial custody of 2 4-year-olds. By the way, that's not a hook when you're trying to get a date. You know, the next line is usually call me in 10 years. So anyway, I met Nancy, and now Nancy had just adopted her granddaughter. Yes. That's the girl that Becca, Kennedy, formerly known as Becca. And so my 2 were exactly the same age as Becca. And we didn't start dating out of romance. It was just like, hey, I'm off on Friday, you're off, or Saturday. Why don't I get the kids and come over to Idaho Falls? That was 130 miles to get there, and take the kids to a park, or it was a play date for the kids, you know, and we just visited. We actually dated for almost 2 years before we went somewhere that didn't have a PlayStation or about that time we found a place called Starlight Roller Rink. Again, things come in your life. Starlight Roller Rink would let you check your kids in. They would give you a little pin and give you a card to get them out, and they could roller skate for 3 hours without us there. And so we would, Friday afternoon, we'd take them over to the roller rink, and we're eating it. I think it's like an Olive Garden. It's like, holy crap, this place doesn't have a PlayStation. But time passed, we got married, and we still didn't live in the same town because it was hard to get jobs. She was working her job in Idaho Falls. I was teaching in Soda Springs, which was still 30-odd miles from my house. I mean, jobs were hard to get, and once you got one, you just hang on, you know. Well, her company gets bought out by Staples buys her company out, and we're like, oh, now we can move in. We can be in the same county, even in the same house. And so she moves in, and she'd always loved my place. I had a little house, 9 acres, a creek down on the side, had horses, and it was, you know, the wintertime skiing, hiking, fishing was great. I had set up a gun range in the back so I could shoot trap out of my backyard. It was a man cave, but it was like a man farm. She moved in and put her touches on it, and she was there maybe 4 months. And I come home from work, and she's like, how do you live here? I'm like, I thought you think, she said, it is beautiful. And on a weekend, if I'm staying Friday, it's nice, you know. She says, do you know you can't buy milk on a Sunday here? I said, I do. That's why we buy it on Saturday. She said, there's no place to buy shoes or Levi's or clothes or shirts. I said, there's an Alco, which is like a, Family Dollar. And she goes, no, I mean a store, real store. And I said, well, and I realized at that point, I had totally acclimated to the country life. Because I looked at her and said, well, you do know I get paid on the 4th Friday of every month. And on the 4th Saturday of every month, and I heard Jed Clampett in my head going, we get in a truck, we drive to the big town. Logan was 70 miles away through Rocky Mountains and everything, to the nearest town that had a Walmart. And it was like, well, then we go to the the Piggly Wiggly. You know, it wasn't a Piggly Wiggly. It was just a Walmart, a grocery store. We go to the fancy eating house, Sizzlers. You know, we could get a little meal, and then we go to the Walmart and we buy and I realized I would buy a month's worth of groceries. You know, everything that except for maybe milk and bread and stuff, because there really wasn't any place to buy up there. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've gone from the guy that owned restaurants in San Diego to that guy that comes out of the mountains every month, you know, says, I'll take a pound of bacon, 5 pounds of flour, and some tobacco. So I told Nancy, find a place to live. Again, it was like, you know, as Frank was saying, I had a house, I had a retirement coming up, and, you know, it's like life was going to be good. The house was nearly paid for, and I said, find a place to live. And she goes, I will. And she did. I came home one day and she goes, we're going to move to Gulfport, Mississippi. And I'm like, excuse me? I was thinking, because at that point I thought Idaho was the place to live. It was gorgeous. Everything I like, horses and fishing and guns. It's all there. And I'm like, where's Gulfport? She said, it's in Mississippi. I said, I got that from the name. Why Gulfport? She said, well, I looked on the internet, and she says, I would look for inexpensive homes, continental United States, near a coast. And she said everything from Bay St. Louis to Orange Grove, or Orange Beach. Came up, and I looked, and she said, and the thing about Gulfport is there are 11 school districts in that area, and 8 of them need a science teacher. And I said, I thought we were going to retire. I was going to retire. She said, about that. You can get a job faster than I can. Matter of fact, you could probably get a job without even going out there, just sending out your resumes. And then once we're there, you can work, and I'll look for work. And she did. She ended up managing the Habitat for Humanity for several years. And again, it just worked out. You just don't ask the questions. Don't question, well, what about this and what about that? It's like, my wife wants to leave. The spirit that's in me says, go. Get her done.
What year was that?
That was 2015. It's coming up. July 31st, 2015. Tomorrow will be 8 years.
And you found us here at Unity.
Yeah, 2016.
Oh, yes, I knew you'd been here for some time. And what, I know we've about used our time here this morning. What would you say that has been the biggest thing in your life that has led you toward healing, wholeness, peace? What is it that stands out for you about life and the flow of life and all these synchronicities that you've spoken of, and how if you trust and go with the flow, you'll find what is meant for you? What advice would you give us about that? Words of wisdom.
I would say just relax. Just sit back, take a breath, don't get in your own way, and trust. And if I may, one more story. I've had 2 very unusual experiences with the afterlife. One of them was my father. I thought when he died, he was out of my life, but he makes my whole life story. He keeps making appearances, like a guest star, you know. At one time, when Nancy and I were married, and she was training to be a store manager for Alco. She was working in Rawlins, Wyoming, and we still had the house in Montpelier. And so on her days off, I would get on my trusty motorcycle, because that's gorgeous motorcycle country up there. Yes, it is. And I would take the ride. It's about a 4-hour ride to Rawlins. Well, you come through all of the chaparral of Wyoming, and you hit a place called Green River. Now, Green River historically is kind of important, but it's beautiful. It's all kinds of like red rocks and stuff, and there is the Green River there, which was major trapping beaver and whatnot. But when you come up out of that little valley, it is flat chaparral for as far as you can see. There's a whole little vanishing thing with the road. And I'm riding, and I can see the storm coming up front. You can see it's gray and black, and it's moving your way. And I'm like, oh, because there's no place to get off the road. You know, I just stop and I leather up. I usually don't ride with my leather, so I put on my helmet, put on my jacket, put on my chaps, you know, put on my goggles and go, we're just going to go through it. And so I'm just putting through. And that storm hit, and the wind wasn't in any one direction. It's just buffeting back and forth, and I'm trying to lean into it and lean out of it. And I'm panicking because I'm like, at what point does the water on the road come to zero friction for the bike on the tires? And my father, before he died, raced motorcycles. He had a 1957 Indian. 650. I think it's a Scout was the model. And I'd heard stories of what a great rider he was, and I'm fighting this wind, and I found myself just saying, Dad, in those words, I wish you were here, because I understand that you've probably forgotten more about motorcycles than I will ever know, and I could use your help. And that bike was under control. I'm not saying the wind stopped, because it was still windy and rainy and still hitting, but suddenly I had control. And I just powered through the storm, came out the other side. When I got there, I had goose flesh all over my body. And I thought, thank you. And I realized that when people pass on, they're not gone. And, I've had experiences with Kayla, and, and I was thinking today on my way in, little dude, he's about ready to pass on. And dude found us. He's a cat. And we had just lost one of our dogs. And I walked out into the backyard, and dude jumps over the fence, walks over to our remaining dog, sniffs him, licks him on the chin, and curls around and lays down. And I told Nancy, I think we have a cat. And he's been with us all this time. And I was thinking on the way in, I said, Nancy, don't worry, because when he goes, he can be laying down with us. Anyway, that's it.
Rick lost one of his daughters. He had 4, and one of the ones that have been 4 years old when...
Yeah.
She died, was it 3 years ago?
August 2019.
So he's, I'm sure he's had a lot of time to contemplate and be visited by her too.
Can I tell him one story about her?
Yes.
Kayla and I had a really interesting relationship. From the time she was little, the two of us just clicked. It was like we knew each other before. And we would make fun of each other. It was good humor, fun. Nancy used to go crazy because she didn't understand it at all. But whenever I'd go shopping, I'd write a check. Most of you know what those are, so I won't explain it. I would put the checkbook in my back pocket, get in the truck, start to drive away, and I'd, just before I pull out, I would check to make sure my checkbook was there. And Kayla, after a while, she would sit there and watch me, and just before I moved, she'd go, "It's not there, it's not there." Every time, and it was just fun. I'd check my checkbook. She says, "You got to check anyway, don't you?" I said, "Yes, I do, OCD." Well, one day I'm coming to church, just after she'd passed, and I sit down always at my desk. I write my offering and put the checkbook in my pocket, and I start to drive, and I get it a little bit away, and what I've always done, check to make sure that it's there, and it wasn't there. I thought, well, no, it's got to be there. So I stop the truck, get out, I look, I pull the seats forward, I look under the seats, look beside the seats, look in the ditty box, look in the glove box, look in your pocket. I must have left it on the desk. And I said, well, no one punishes you for being late to church. So I go back, I open the door, walk in, I look at my desk, it's not on my desk. I look in the drawers, check my pocket again, back to the truck, I'm like, where could my checkbook be? And I get in the car, and I'm thinking all the time, and when I pull in here, I check, and there it is in my back pocket. And I'm going, how could I have missed it? Oh, and I thought, Kayla, just one more time.
Oh, well, you've certainly been touched by angels in your life, Rick, and all of us who know you and have been blessed to be with you and experience your beautiful music and your voice and just everything about you. We feel blessed to have you here. And we're certainly glad and thank Nancy for finding Gulfport,
Yeah.
Mississippi. And glad you came and thank you for sharing.
Thank you.